The office went completely silent when the CEO slammed his hand against the conference table. Every person in the room froze, but the man standing at the end of the table didn't move. He was a tired single father named Daniel Carter, wearing a wrinkled shirt, worn shoes, and carrying the weight of 1,000 problems behind his eyes. The CEO leaned forward and shouted, "Get it done, or get the hell out of my company." Nobody expected Daniel to answer. Nobody expected what he would do next. He slowly placed the project folder on the table, looked at the CEO, and simply walked out. He didn't slam the door. He didn't argue. He didn't beg for his job. He just walked away, unaware that his decision would change not only his own life, but the future of the company itself. Before we continue, if you believe everyone deserves kindness, respect, and a second chance, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, leave a comment, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Sometimes one small act of kindness can remind someone that they are not alone. Daniel had never imagined his life would become this difficult. 3 years earlier, he had been married, raising his little daughter Emma with dreams of buying a small house and giving her a peaceful childhood. But after his wife passed away unexpectedly, everything changed. Daniel became a father, mother, provider, cook, cleaner, homework helper, and protector all at once. Every morning began before sunrise. He would prepare Emma's breakfast, pack her lunch, make sure she had clean clothes, and then rush across town to reach work on time. His job at Sterling Innovations was not glamorous, but it paid the bills. And every paycheck meant another week of food, rent, electricity, medicine, and school supplies for his daughter. Daniel was an operations manager, and he was good at his job. He wasn't the loudest person in meetings, nor did he seek attention. He simply solved problems. When machines broke down, he found solutions. When employees argued, he listened. When shipments were delayed, he stayed late. But nobody knew how many nights he sat in his car outside the office, taking a deep breath before going home because he was exhausted beyond words. Nobody knew that sometimes he skipped lunch so he could save enough money for Emma's medicine. Nobody knew that the coffee on his desk was often the only thing keeping him awake. Then came the biggest project Sterling Innovations had ever attempted. The company had developed a new logistics system that could potentially save millions of dollars, but everything depended on a final implementation deadline. Daniel had warned management that the schedule was too aggressive. He had submitted reports showing the risks. But the CEO, Richard Mason, was under enormous pressure from investors and refused to listen. Richard was a powerful businessman who had built the company from nothing. He believed weakness was unacceptable. To him, employees were numbers on spreadsheets, deadlines were sacred, and excuses were worthless. He rarely asked what someone was going through. He only wanted results. As the deadline approached, several things went wrong at once. A supplier failed to deliver critical equipment. The software developed unexpected errors. 2 senior employees resigned. Daniel worked 16-hour days trying to keep everything together. He barely slept. One night, while sitting at his desk at nearly midnight, his phone buzzed. It was Emma's school nurse. His daughter had developed a fever and needed to be picked up. Daniel stared at the computer screen for several seconds. He had a major presentation scheduled for the next morning. But he was a father before he was an employee. He left immediately. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the office with Emma's medical papers still inside his bag. He looked exhausted, but he was ready to continue. Unfortunately, the CEO had already heard about the missed hours. The emergency meeting began at 9. Richard stood at the front of the conference room while senior executives sat around the table. Daniel presented the updated numbers, explaining the problems and proposing a revised strategy. But Richard wasn't interested in explanations. He wanted the project completed by Friday. Daniel carefully explained that forcing the system live without proper testing could cause a catastrophic failure. Richard's face hardened. Then came those words that would stay with Daniel forever. Get it done, or get the hell out of my company. The room became painfully quiet. Daniel looked around the table. Some people lowered their eyes. Others pretended to study their notes. Not one person defended him. For a moment, Daniel thought about his daughter. He thought about the rent due in 5 days. He thought about the empty refrigerator at home. He thought about the small envelope in his drawer containing the last of his savings. Then he remembered something his wife had once told him: never let someone convince you that your worth is measured by how much disrespect you can tolerate. Daniel slowly closed his folder. He stood up. And he walked. Outside the building, the cold wind hit his face. For the first time in years, he had no idea what he was going to do next. He sat inside his old car and stared at the steering wheel. Then his phone rang. It was Emma. "Daddy, are you coming home?" Daniel closed his eyes, fighting back tears. "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered. "Daddy's coming." That evening, Daniel made pancakes for dinner because Emma loved them. He smiled while she talked about school, even though inside he was terrified. After she went to sleep, Daniel opened his laptop and began searching for work. Then something unexpected happened. An email arrived. It was from one of Sterling Innovation's largest clients. The client had discovered that Daniel had warned management about the system failure weeks earlier. They had seen his reports. They knew he had tried to prevent the disaster. The client wanted Daniel to explain the situation directly. Daniel agreed. The next morning, he met with the client and carefully explained everything. He didn't insult Richard. He didn't complain about the company. He simply presented the facts and offered a safer solution. The client was impressed. Within 48 hours, Daniel received a job offer. It wasn't just another operations position. It was a senior leadership role with a salary nearly double what he had been earning. Meanwhile, Sterling Innovations began to collapse. Richard had ignored Daniel's warnings. The company launched the system without proper testing. Within hours, orders were duplicated. Shipments were lost. Customers couldn't access their accounts. Millions of dollars were suddenly at risk. Richard demanded answers. Then someone placed Daniel's old reports on his desk. Every warning was there. Every risk Daniel had predicted was happening exactly as he had described. Richard sat alone in his office, staring at the pages. For the first time in years, he realized that the man he had called weak had actually been the only person trying to protect the company. But the story wasn't over. Richard called Daniel. Daniel answered calmly. Richard expected anger. He expected revenge. Instead, Daniel simply listened. Richard admitted that he had been wrong. Daniel could have laughed. He could have reminded him of the words from the conference room. He could have demanded an apology. But then Daniel remembered what it felt like to stand alone while everyone watched. He agreed to help. Not because Richard deserved it. Because hundreds of employees did. Daniel returned temporarily as a consultant and helped stabilize the company. He worked alongside people who had once watched him walk away without saying a word. This time, nobody treated him like a number. When the crisis finally ended, Richard offered Daniel his old position back with a massive raise. Daniel smiled. Then he respectfully declined. He had already accepted the new leadership position elsewhere. Richard looked surprised. Daniel simply told him that sometimes losing a job is not the end of your story. Sometimes it is the beginning of the life you were too afraid to pursue. Months later, Daniel moved into a modest new home with Emma. It wasn't a mansion. It wasn't luxurious. But it had something his old life had been missing. Peace. One evening, Emma ran through the front door carrying a drawing. It showed her and her father standing beneath a bright yellow sun. At the bottom she had written, "My daddy never gives up." Daniel looked at the picture and quietly cried. He realized that the hardest day of his life had not destroyed him. It had redirected him. And sometimes, the door that closes in your face is the same door that pushes you toward a better future. If this story touched your heart, please don't just watch and scroll away. Like the video, share it with someone who is struggling silently, and subscribe to Kindness Corner. Your support may help this story reach someone who desperately needs to hear that their current situation is not their final destination. And before we end, I have one special request. Comment, "I will never give up," if you believe that difficult seasons can lead to better beginnings. Because Daniel didn't win by shouting louder than his CEO. He won by refusing to let one man's anger define his worth. He walked away with nothing but a tired heart, a worried daughter, and faith that something better was waiting. And sometimes, that is all a person needs to take the first step toward a completely different life.